Today's lesson comes from section 11.4. We're on day 2 of simplifying radical expressions. Today we're going to simplify by distributing. So our main objectives is we want to be able to multiply a monomial by a binomial radical expression. These are level 1 and level 2 questions. All that means is that we're going to take one term and multiply it by an expression that has 2 terms. Okay, and then our second objective is to multiply 2 binomial radical expressions together. So two expressions that have 2 terms, and those are our level 3 questions. So those are definitely the harder ones that we're going to see. Okay, in order to do this, we're going to have to follow a few steps because it's going to get a little bit difficult. So we're going to want to make sure that we have a process down. Okay, so our first step that we're going to do is that we're going to simplify. Okay, obviously if we simplify first, we kind of eliminate any headaches that we have later when it comes to bigger numbers. Okay, so simplify first, then you're going to distribute. Okay, and then you're going to simplify again. Okay, so let's start with some level 1 questions. Let's do radical 2 times radical 8 minus 4. Okay, just like we were doing with distributing before, we're going to distribute that radical 2 by multiplying it by each of those terms. So radical 2 times radical 8 is radical 16. And then take the radical 2 and multiply it by that negative 4. So radical 2 times negative 4 is negative 4 radical 2. Remember, numbers that are outside do not combine with numbers that are inside the radical, so we just keep the negative 4 outside, keep the 2 inside, and then we're good. Okay, so we distributed, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to simplify again. So we look at this and see, oh wait, we have the square root of 16. What is that? That's 4. So this is 4 minus 4 radical 2. Okay, question number 2. Let's try radical 3 times 7 minus radical 5. Alright, start by distributing the radical 3 to the 7. So radical 3 times 7, numbers inside do not combine with numbers outside, so I'm just going to keep that 7 outside the radical and write the 3 underneath the radical. And then distribute the radical 3 to that negative radical 5. Outside we have 1 times an invisible negative 1, so we have negative radical. Inside we have 3 times 5, which is 15. And then we're going to check and see if we can simplify it again. 3 and the 15 doesn't break down anymore because it becomes 5 and 3. Both are prime. There aren't any pairs. And so 3 and 15 are not like do not make like radicals, so our final answer is 7 radical 3 minus radical 15. Okay, your 1 and 2a question is radical 7 times radical 3 minus 5. Okay, very similar to numbers to question number 2, so that one should go pretty easy for you. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to some level 2 questions. So level 2, they get a little bit tougher because we combine a little more concepts. Okay, a little bit of bigger numbers. Let's do radical 8 times radical 5 minus 2 radical 3. Again, we're going to distribute the radical 8 to the radical 5, and that becomes radical 40. Distribute the radical 8 to the negative 2 radical 3. Outside we have 1 times negative 2 is negative 2. Inside we have 8 times 3 is 24. And I didn't even follow my own instructions here. I say to simplify first. And this is one of those times where that would have came in handy because now I end up having to simplify bigger numbers at the end. You know, I say simplify first because it should make it easier for you. But again, if it's okay if you end up simplifying all at the end. So you can do these problems many different ways. Alright, so 40 breaks down into, let's do 10 and 4. 10 breaks down into 2 and 5. 4 breaks down into 2 and 2. So radical 40, I have a pair of 2's. pull them out. I have 5 times 2 left at home, which is 10. So radical 40 is 2 radical 10. And then the 24 breaks down into 6 and 4. 6 breaks down into 2 and 3. 4 breaks down into 2 and 2. I have a pair of 2's. I want to multiply that pair of 2's by what's already outside. So I'm going to take 2 times negative 2, that's negative 4. Left at home is 2 times 3, which is 6. So I have 2 radical 10 minus 4 radical 6. 10 and 6, not like radicals, they can't combine, so that problem's finished. Okay. Your 3A question for you to try is radical 10 times 6 minus 4 radical 5. And question number 4, let's do 2 radical 3 times 4 radical 3 plus 5 radical 2 minus 7. Alright, so follow the same steps. We got to make sure we distribute that 2 radical 3 to everything inside the parentheses. So we're going to do 2 radical 3 times 4 radical 3. 2 times 4 is 8 outside the radical. Radical 3 times radical 3, now we worked out in this a lot in class today. Radical 3 times radical 3 is just 3, so that's 8 times 3. And then let's distribute the 2 radical 3 to the 5 radical 2. So 2 times 5 is positive 10. And then underneath the radical we have 3 times 2, which is 6. And then last but not least, let's distribute that 2 radical 3 to the negative 7. So outside the radical we have 2 times negative 7, which is negative 14. Inside the radical we only have a 3 because there's no radical with the 7 there. Okay, so simplify. 8 times 3 is 24. Plus 10 radical 6 minus 14 radical 3. And 6 and 3 are not like radicals. They can't be broken down any further. So 24 plus 10 radical 6 minus 14 radical 3 is my final answer. So your 4A question for you to try is 3 radical 5, parentheses 6 radical 2, minus 4 radical 7, plus 8. And with that, we're going to move into our final toughest level for the day, our level 3 questions. And these are where we're going to get into that second objective. So that second objective is to multiply 2 binomial radical expressions together. Okay, so we're going to get 2 terms in both of our parentheses here. So we're going to do a lot of distributing. So question number 5, let's do radical 3 minus radical 5 times radical 3 plus radical 5. Okay, now in this problem we want to make sure that we distribute both terms in the first set of parentheses to both terms in the second set of parentheses. So I'm going to do radical 3 times radical 3. And that is just 3, because the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is the square root of 9, which is 3. And then I want to distribute that radical 3 to the positive radical 5. So radical 3 times positive radical 5 is positive radical 15. I want to distribute that negative radical 5. I'm done with the radical 3 because I distributed it to both things in the second set of parentheses. So I'm going to move on to my negative radical 5. And so negative radical 5 times positive radical 3 is negative radical 15. And then negative radical 5 times positive radical 5 is negative times positive 1 is negative. And then the square root of 5 times the square root of 5 is 5. Okay, so then I'm going to combine like terms here. I can combine these radical 15s together, and they actually end up just canceling each other out. And then I have 3 minus 5, which is negative 2. So negative 2 is my final answer. Your 5A question is radical 2 plus radical 7 times radical 2 minus radical 7. Okay, and then the last question for the day, let's do question number 6. Let's do 4 radical 7 plus 3 times 5 minus 2 radical 7. Alright, and let's follow this process all the way through. So we're going to distribute do the 4 radical 7 to the first term in the second set of parentheses. So 4 times 5 is 20. And then I got to drag that radical 7 along. Do the first term times the second term in the second set of parentheses. So 4 radical 7 times negative 2 radical 7. I do 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. Times radical 7 times radical 7 is 7. And I've distributed that 4 radical 7 to everything in the second set of parentheses, so I'm going to move on to that 3. So 3 times 5 is 15, so plus 15. And then 3 times negative 2 radical 7, I do 3 times negative 2, which is negative 6. And then the only thing I have underneath the radical is that 7. I'm going to clean this up a little bit by simplifying. So I have 20 radical 7 minus 8 times 7 is 56, plus 15 minus 6 radical 7. I want to combine like terms, so I have 20 radical 7 and negative 6 radical 7. I know from yesterday's lesson that 20 minus 6 is 14, and I just keep the radical 7 along. And then negative 56 plus 15 is negative 41. Okay, so my final answer is 14 radical 7 minus 41. And your 6A question, last question for the day, is radical 3 minus 2 radical 5 times radical 5 plus 3 radical 2. And that's it.